My whole timeline was talking about Kendrick yesterday, so I guess I'll talk about Kendrick as well. Except they were talking about Kendrick Lamar. I'll be talking about Kendrick Blackshire.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, Kendrick Blackshire is in the transfer portal once again. In the second segment, the legendary 2018 class is now finished at the University of Texas with Kristen Jones being drafted. We look back on that class that helped shape where Texas is today, believe it or not. And then Malik Presley, the latest transfer to commit to the University of Texas basketball team, Rodney Terry and his staff, an Austin area kid from Vanderbilt. Stop me when you've heard that before. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I was talking about Dylan Dessou, right? Like, I hope everybody got that, but if you didn't, I don't want you thinking about it for the next 20 minutes. Dylan Dessou, Austin area kid, transferred from Vanderbilt. I think it worked out really well for the University of Texas. Anyways, first segment, we were talking about football, and I said, the first week or second week of January when it happened that, arguably the greatest coach of all time and Nick Saban retiring was a seismic move for college football. And it ended up being that, right? Because we saw so much movement between coaches and players in the portal, and that movement is still going on, right? Like there are still, players entering the portal, moving around and things of that nature that come as a direct result of Nick Saban retiring, right? Because then he retires, Alabama players enter the portal, Kalen DeBoer takes that job, Washington players enter the portal, right? The coach from Arizona replaces him. So now Arizona players enter the portal, right? Or think about leaving. And then, like I said, it just creates this massive tornado of movement across the region, across college football, all because Nick Saban retired. And it's hard to argue that a school other than Texas has benefited more from Nick Saban's retirement because they were able to bring in 2 players from Arizona directly and 3 players from Alabama directly as a result, or partially as a result, of Nick Saban retiring. And as I said, that movement is still going on because, just in the last week and a half since the spring game, Texas has brought in another defensive tackle from Arizona, and Kendrick Blackshire, one of the 3 players from Alabama that transferred over earlier in the year, is now moving on and once again in the transfer portal. And based on what we know now, it seems as though, Kendrick Blackshire and the University of Texas were treating this as a tryout, right? And, it makes sense with him having 2 years of eligibility left and him looking to fulfill his lifelong dreams of being a professional football player. He really has 2 years left to prove it at the college football level. And it doesn't make sense to, spend one of those years at the University of Texas sitting on the bench, regardless of how, good it feels to be home. When you look at Kendrick Blackshire coming out of high school in the 2021 class, committed to Alabama. I think he was ranked 178th in the 24/7 Sports Composite, so a top 200 player in the country at the linebacker position out of the state of Texas, and he had a man body, right? Like then back in high school, like a first off the bus type body. You really expected that a player like that with that pedigree, that body type, that amount of talent level could go to a place like Alabama where it seems like every defensive player goes to succeed and really play at a high level, especially under one of the greatest coaches of all time, if not the greatest, in Nick Saban. And really, arguably one of the greatest programs of all time as well. And it just never worked out like that for Kendrick Blackshire. In 3 seasons at University of Alabama, he never played more than 6 games in a season. And total, he amassed 25 tackles and 1 forced fumble. 16 of those come in last season, right? So, 3 seasons, 25 tackles. Like I said, it never really worked out for him at the University of Alabama. I think he was hoping that he could come back home to the University of Texas and things would all start to click here, right? You come back home, you're motivated being back in Texas. And now, as opposed to when he came out of high school, Texas is either on the same level as Alabama or, in my opinion, I think we've surpassed Alabama moving forward, right? Obviously, what they've done in the past is the past, right? And nobody can compare to what Alabama's done over the last 15 to 16 years. But I think moving forward, at least right now, until Kalen DeBoer proves himself in Tuscaloosa, Texas is in a better position Texas right now is a better program moving forward than Alabama until Kalen DeBoer proves himself, right? And so for Kendrick Blackshire, it was an opportunity to come back home and, finally get everything to click, right, for the first time since he left high school. And like I said, he was approaching it as a tryout. It seems like the University of Texas and staff were approaching it as a tryout. And it makes sense, right, for him to come to Texas and think he had an opportunity to play, because this is a team that just lost 2 linebackers to the National Football League, right? Jeb Bush signed with the Patriots, and Jalen Ford was drafted to the New Orleans Pelicans, right? The New Orleans Saints. NBA playoff mode. And so you look at it, you got Anthony Hill in the room, who obviously is a young superstar, and so you're not moving him, right? I guess the hope is you could play next to him. Then you got David Bender, who was really good for us last year, a veteran leader, a really good linebacker in that room, but I don't think anybody looks at David Bender as not being replaceable, right? Same thing with Mo Blackwell, game speed, as Steven from Fanatic Perspective likes to call him, really good football player, really good motor and everything, but like I said, I don't think anybody looks at him as not being replaceable, right? And then you had, behind that, Leon LaFau, ultimately Samaj Burrell would enter the portal, Darion Gillette. I think Kendrick Blackshire looked at that room and saw opportunity, right? And just based on the way I just described it, I don't think he was wrong for that, right? I do think there was some potential opportunity in that room if Kendrick Blackshire could come in and, show that he was a plus football player, right? And I think that if it was a tryout and he did have an opportunity to come in and be a part of this linebacker rotation, that he didn't do himself really any favors in proving that he should be a part of this rotation. And it could be one of the biggest reasons he's back in the portal right now. If you remember during spring practices, during the press conferences, there was one where Steve Sarkisian identified 3 players who were overweight, right, or not at the ideal weight that they wanted in the spring. But he did mention that he wasn't worried about it because they had plenty of time to, work it off playing in the heat. But that might have been, a little bit of a smokescreen, because when you look at it, the 3 players he mentioned, Savion Red being overweight at the running back position at 240 pounds, Kendrick Blackshire being overweight at, about 265 at linebacker, and then Sadir Mitchell being overweight at 372 pounds at the defensive tackle position. Really, it seems like the team has already kind of moved on from all 3 of those players, even though 2 have only entered the portal, right? Savion Red hit the portal at the running back position. Kendrick Blackshire, who I'm speaking about, entered the portal at the linebacker position, and Sadir Mitchell was still on campus, right? But we didn't really hear nearly anything about him during the spring. And in the 2 weeks since the spring game, it hasn't even been 2 full weeks, Texas has gone out and got another defensive tackle to bring into that rotation, who likely slots in immediately over Sadir Mitchell, because we heard Steve Sarkisian say that he felt like he only had 3 defensive tackles right now that he could trust in that room, right? And that was Vernon Broughton, Tia Savea, and Alfred Collins. So I would expect bringing in Bill Norton, he immediately slides in over Sadir Mitchell, right? So those 3 players who came into spring practices overweight, right, did not do themselves any favors. And once again, I think that's why Kendrick Blackshire is once again in the transfer portal, looking for a home and looking for somewhere where he can actually play over the next 2 years and, prove to himself and everybody else that he's a professional football player. So always seemed like a low risk, high reward move. You either got a player that wasn't good enough to play at the University of Texas, especially this version of the University of Texas that's a perennial national championship contender, and he entered the portal again, or you got the best version of Kendrick Blackshire and he was a plus linebacker for you on the field. Like I said, low risk, high reward move that just didn't work out for either parties. And I wish Kendrick Blackshire the best moving forward, right? But, I think we'll be fine in that room. As I've said, I think the only transfer portal departures that'll really affect this team throughout the season, especially if we don't address it in the portal window right now, are Austin Jordan and Terrence Brooks. I really think we need some high quality depth in that room, because that's what you lost. You lost a player who was a starter for you in 13 out of 14 games last year, and Austin Jordan, who always came in and made really good plays. So you need some high quality depth to replace them. But as far as players like Kendrick Blackshire, Savion Red, Samaj Burrell, Jamon Tapp, Peyton Kirkland, and I'm missing somebody, right? But whoever else entered the portal, those are the type of players that you say are really talented. We enjoyed their time at the University of Texas, but we'll be just fine in that room, because you got 3 to 4 players in that room, in those rooms, without those guys, who could probably start on most teams in the country. And I just think Kendrick Blackshire, like I said, low risk, high reward move. He came in, and after a month, you decided that you have 4 or 5 linebackers that could probably play at a higher level than Kendrick Blackshire. And that's why you moved on. A quick word from our sponsors, and we talk about the 2018 class, who I've long talked about as one of the most talented in the history of the University of Texas, has finally come to a close at the 40 acres with Christian Jones getting drafted. Inside Texas did a Where Are They Now on the 2018 2018 recruiting class at the University of Texas under Tom Herman. And we discuss that next. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right. So I've long said that I really said it when the 2023 class came out. Like when you looked at it and you just saw the level of players in it, right? A Jonte Cook, a Malik Muhammad, Anthony Hill, a Arch Manning, right? I mean, the list goes on and on. Derek Williams, right? I was like, this is the type of class that could rival the 2018 class in terms of just pure star power, right? And I still don't even think that we got, the full potential out of the 2018 class with everything that was going on at the University of Texas at the time. That was for, Tom Herman's first recruiting class after his full season, after his first full season at the University of Texas, which led to, his best season at the University of Texas in 2018. And then it kind of just was all downhill from there. But I do think that was a very influential class, right? Because you had some really good players in it that played some really good football at a high level in a tough situation under Tom Herman. And then you had some of those players who helped shape the culture that we see today under Steve Sarkisian, right? Because the majority of those players in that class left after Steve Sarkisian became the coach. So, I think regardless of how you want to look at it, whether it was a really good class or whether they left some meat on the bone, I think undoubtedly this is one of the classes that helped shape, the University of Texas, right? And the football program we see today and the football program we saw under Tom Herman, right? It was one of those transition classes. And I think that they had some really good football players in that class that, like I said, helped us under Tom Herman and certainly helped us under Steve Sarkisian. So I guess without further ado, we'll get into the 2018 class and where they are now. I really love this article by Joe Cook in Inside Texas because that's one of my favorite classes of all time. And, to see this update is really cool. So I'm just going to read this kind of excerpt before it and then talk about all the players. There's a lot of them. Tom Herman's signing class on the heels of his first season at Texas featured 14 top 200 prospects, a quarterback flipped from Oklahoma, and another quarterback who was the son of a Sooner quarterback himself. The class was highlighted by a defensive back corps that featured 2 5-stars and several top 50 prospects. Ultimately, only 6 members of the 29-man class were drafted from Texas. 18 elected to leave the program, and 1 had to medically retire before even recording a snap. So here we go. All right. Interesting class already. BJ Foster. All right. A lot of people have, differing opinions on BJ Foster. Number 17 overall in the On3 rankings, a 5-star coming out of high school. Ended up transferring to Sam Houston State after the 2021 season, the initial season with Steve Sarkisian and staff, where we went 5-7. It was first team all WAC in 2022. So BJ Foster, according to On3, highest ranked player in the class. Never really worked out that way at the University of Texas, but ended up playing some good football at Sam Houston. Not sure if he's still at Sam Houston or he's moved on, but, didn't necessarily work out at the University of Texas, but still a really good football player. Caden Stearns, one of my favorite Longhorns ever. I know that may be controversial to some people listening, but it is what it is. He also was a guest on Locked On Longhorns, so I'm forever grateful. When you look at it, Caden Stearns, number 20 overall player in that class, a 5-star. Believe the last safety to be first team all conference at the University of Texas in 2018. So the little Caden Stearns fun fact for you, right? Declared after his junior season, picked 152nd overall by the Denver Broncos in the 5th round of the 2021 draft. And Justin Simmons just moved on. I believe he I think Jesse Bates went to Atlanta. But I don't think Justin Simmons is on the Broncos anymore. If any Broncos fans are listening to this, I guess you can confirm. So Caden Stearns should have an opportunity to get some really good playing time this season. So excited for Caden Stearns. Like I said, one of my favorite players to come through the 40. Jalen Green, cornerback out of Houston, number 40 overall, 4-star. According to On3, transferred to Mississippi State after the 2020 season, recorded 91 tackles and 4 interceptions at 2 seasons at Mississippi State as a safety. Shout out to Jalen Green. Hadn't heard that name in so long, outside of the one that plays for the Houston Rockets, right? DeMarvion Overshown. I'm a Cowboys fan. He plays for my Cowboys, right? So obviously we know one of those players that I talked about, helped shape the culture. I wouldn't say help shape the culture, but, really started to come on under Tom Herman and, then really blossomed under Steve Sarkisian, especially with the position change from safety to linebacker. Played 5 years at Texas, picked 90th overall by the Dallas Cowboys in the third round of the 2023 draft. Obviously, he tore his ACL last year in the preseason. Unfortunately, my team had no linebackers by the time the season ended as a result of that injury. But I'm hoping he can come back strong this year because he looked really exciting in the preseason. I think he can be a really exciting player in the National Football League. Brennan Eagles, wide receiver, A-Leaf, number 55 overall in that class, according to On3, declared after his junior season, undrafted free agent with the Dallas Cowboys, short stints in the USFL and the CFL. Anthony Cook, one of those players that played at a high level in both eras, Tom Herman and Steve Sarkisian, number 57 overall in that class out of Houston Lamar, played 5 years at Texas, undrafted free agent with Kansas City, his first year in the National Football League, not currently on a roster. Joshua Moore, all right, just a really talented football player at the wide receiver position who I thought made some great catches, but it just never worked out at the University of Texas. Left the program after the 2021 season, period. Right, number 94 overall in the class, 4-star. Keandre Coburn, Big Snacks out of Spring, Westfield, right? Number 111 overall player in the class, 4-star, played 5 years at Texas, picked 194th overall by the Kansas City Chiefs in the 6th round of the 2023 NFL draft, currently on the Tennessee Titans. So he will be reunited with T'Vondre Sweat, playing the same position up front next to an all-pro in Jeffrey Simmons. So hopefully it works out for both of them. Nashville is a great city, and it really fits the personality of players like Keandre Coburn and T'Vondre Sweat, all right, because they're just larger than life personalities, larger than life players as well. And so, like I said, Nashville is the type of city where whatever you give them, they'll give it back to you tenfold. And I can just really see, players like T'Vondre Sweat and Keandre Coburn really being fan favorites in a city like Nashville. And the food there is amazing, right? So if y'all take care of business, they're going to feed you well, man. And y'all going to need to stay on that heavier side. Maybe not T'Vondre Sweat, but you're going to need to stay on that heavier side to play at a high level in the trenches. Junior Angelau, offensive lineman from Salt Lake City, Utah, number 121 overall in the class, 4-star, transferred to Oregon after the 2022 season, played in 3 games in the 23 season, undrafted. I did not know he only played in 3 games last year. It's just unfortunate. I thought he left a little bit too early at the University of Texas, but he was also told to leave when he left, and we recruited so well at the offensive line position. It's worked out for us, and hopefully in some form or fashion it works out for Junior Angelau. Alvonte Woodard, Houston, Texas, Lamar, number 127 overall in the class, transferred to Sam Houston State after the 2021 season, recorded 47 catches for 554 yards and 4 touchdowns in 2 seasons at Sam Houston State. A long time since I heard that name too. Deshaun Jameson, another player that helped set the culture under the Steve Sarkisian era, right, and played under Tom Herman. Number 131 overall in that class out of Houston, Texas. Lamar played 5 years at Texas, undrafted free agent with San Francisco, but currently on the Carolina Panthers. JT Sanders and Jonathan Brooks headed to town with their former teammate Deshaun Jameson. Adeo, linebacker, IMG Academy via St. Louis, number 134 overall in the class, transferred to Sacramento State after the 2021 season, and then transferred to Incarnate Word after the 2022 season. Keontae Ingram, number 172 overall in the class, transferred to USC after the 2020 season, rushed 156 times for 911 yards and 5 touchdowns. He was drafted with the 201st overall pick by the Arizona Cardinals in the 6th round of the 2022 NFL Draft, currently on the Kansas City Chiefs with Xavier Worthy. Joseph Asai, edge from Conroe, Oak Ridge, number 192 overall in the class, 4-star, declared after his junior season, picked 69th overall by the Cincinnati Bengals in the 3rd round of the 2021 NFL Draft, and has appeared in a Super Bowl since entering the National Football League. Cam Rising, number 261 overall in the class, transferred to Utah after the 2018 season, still is with Utah. All right, Malcolm Epps, tight end, Spring, Texas, Decaney, 263 overall, transferred to USC after the 2021 season, played 2 years with the Trojans, only caught 13 passes, transferred to Pitt for the 2023 season, caught 9 passes, received a rookie minicamp invite from the Indianapolis Colts. Mikey Grandy, medically retired ahead of his first season, just a sad case there. Reese Moore, number 303 overall, transferred to Abilene Christian after 3 seasons at Texas, started 21 games for the Wildcats at left tackle, voted first team all-conference in 2022. So that's really good to hear. Rafidi Girmay, O-lineman from Frisco, number 306 overall, transferred to Abilene Christian after 4 seasons at Texas. Casey Thompson, right, 308 overall. We know he's been all over the country. Transferred to Nebraska after the 2021 season. 2,407 yards and 17 touchdowns with the Cornhuskers, then transferred to Florida Atlantic after the 2022 season, played in 3 games before tearing his ACL, and now he is at Oklahoma backing up, what's his name, Jackson Arnold? Yeah, so I guess it all came full circle for Casey Thompson, who ended up back at Oklahoma. Moral Ojimo, D lineman, Katy, Texas, played 5 seasons at Texas, picked 249th overall by the Philadelphia Eagles in the 7th round of the 2023 NFL Draft. Byron Vaughns, right? He was all over as well. Transferred to Utah State after the 2020 season, tallied 99 tackles, 19 tackles for loss, and 6 sacks with the Aggies. Then transferred to Baylor after the 2022 season, had 32 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks last season with the Baylor Bears, an undrafted free agent with the Cowboys. Michael Williams, D lineman from Baton Rouge, transferred to LSU after the 2018 season. Daniel Carson transferred to Western Illinois after 3 seasons at Texas. Jawan Mitchell from a Kansas Community College, signed with Texas ahead of the 2019 season out of Butler, played 2 seasons at Texas, transferred to Tennessee after the 2020 season, and played in 10 games for the Volunteers, transferred to Arizona State, then was dismissed, and then transferred to Colorado ahead of the 2023 season. Obviously, Kristen Jones, one of the best development stories ever at the 40 Acres, was just drafted in the 5th round of the NFL Draft by the Arizona Cardinals. Willie Tyler ended up at Louisville after the 2022 season, transferred to Louisiana Monroe and Rutgers prior to that. And then your punter transferred to SMU after the 2020 season, punted 80 times, averaging 44.1 yards per punt at SMU. So I think that's really good. And then Cameron Dicker, undrafted free agent with the Los Angeles Rams, currently on the Los Angeles Chargers. So when you looked at that 2018 class at the time, and I guess it took me a long time to run through that because there's so many players in it. When you looked at that 2018 class at the time, you looked at it as a program-defining class for the Tom Herman era. And I still think it became a program-defining class, just not in the way that we thought, right? Because those players, you know, some of those players played at a really high level under Tom Herman. Some never got the chance or the development to play at a high level under Tom Herman or Steve Sarkisian. And then some of those players I mentioned really were a huge part of shaping the culture under Steve Sarkisian that you see today. And some of those players that I just mentioned are a huge part as to why everybody wants to play for the University of Texas. Everybody wants to come back home to Texas, and why Texas should be a perennial national championship contender moving forward. So congrats to everybody in that 2018 class, regardless of where they are now. A huge congrats to the ones that stayed at Texas and ended up being drafted from Texas. And now we can close the book on one of the most historic classes in recent memory at the 40 Acres. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into Malik Presley. Once again, Vanderbilt transfer, Austin area kid, headed to the 40 Acres. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frisbees. There always is something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now free on the Google Play Store or the App Store. Game on. All right. All right, give me a second. I'm pulling up this article right here. Okay, I got to go back and find it. But anyways, when you looked at this Texas basketball team and what they've done so far in the portal, I think they've made some really good moves, right? So I guess the best way to look at it is what we've lost. You know, you lost Chris Johnson, the player from Mo City, the true freshman that didn't really get a ton of opportunity this season. He entered the portal. You lost Ithia Horton, who ran out of eligibility. You lost Dylan Dessou, who ran out of eligibility. Max Asmus, who ran out of eligibility. And then Brock Cunningham, who ran out of eligibility, right? And then you brought in Tremont Mark, Julian Larry, Jason Kent, Nick Cody, high school class, Trey Johnson, high school class, and then Jordan Pope, and then now Malik Presley, right? when you look at it going into next season, right, because you pretty much lost every guard out of your rotation. Oh, I forgot. And then Tyrese Hunter and Dylan Mitchell, who both entered the portal. You pretty much lost every guard that you had in your rotation last season outside of Kendall Weaver. I'm sorry. All right. And then when you look at it this season, you could potentially lose every guard that you have in your rotation this year. Right. And so it makes sense to bring in a player like Malik Presley, who doesn't really have, much production to put his name behind in terms of college basketball thus far. Right. Didn't get a ton of playing time as a true freshman at Vanderbilt out of the San Marcos area. But you're essentially saying, okay, now we have a player at the guard position that we know will be here next year. Right. And whether he turns into depth, a starter, somebody who just gets their degree or somebody who eventually enters the portal again, we know we'll be going into next season with a guard on the roster. Because when you look at it, Tremont Mark, right, and Julian Larry, they're exhausting their college eligibility this season, right? Then you got Jordan Pope, who will be going into his junior year. If he has a really good season, he could get enough NBA draft buzz to move on. Kendall Weaver will be going into his junior season, right? If he has enough NBA draft buzz, I think he'll stay, 4 years. But if he has enough NBA draft buzz, he could decide to move on or maybe go get a bigger role somewhere else, depending on how Rodney Terry is playing him. And then Trey Johnson, right? He's the number 6 recruit in the country. They talked about him being the best pure scorer in the class. Really don't see a scenario in which he stays more than 1 year at the University of Texas. So there is a possibility you could go into next season with no guards on the roster, right? And so you need to bring in a player like Malik Presley, who you would expect to be on the roster next year, no matter what happens this season, especially since he'll be probably in a bench, come in when we're blowing somebody out type of role. Also, I talked about it earlier in the show. I do love the connection of you go get Dylan Dessou, a player who, was good at Vanderbilt, but wanted to come back home and shine for the program he grew up rooting for in the University of Texas, and it worked out really well. Who knows if Malik Presley coming back home to the Austin area will play his best basketball now being able to represent the Longhorn and the University of Texas in that burnt orange and white, right? Playing at home where he grew up in front of his friends and family. So I really like this addition to bring over Malik Presley. When you look at what he was able to do in just his true freshman season at Vanderbilt, like I said, not a ton of production. You're kind of projecting that he could be a great player eventually at the 40 acres, but he's just a player right now to help fill out the roster, right? In his true freshman season, Presley appeared in 26 games and made 5 starts for Vanderbilt, averaging 2.2 points and 1.6 rebounds in his 11.8 minutes per game, shooting 42.9% from the field. He upped his production to 6 points and 3 rebounds per game in the final 3 contests of the season, where he played in 20 or more minutes per game. He had a career-high 11 points in a January matchup against number 11 ranked Auburn, with also 4 rebounds in that game. So as a true freshman, that's a really good, game against one of the best teams in the country this year. Presley played high school basketball at San Marcos High School in Texas, where he was a 3-star prospect. He was a McDonald's All-American Game nominee, averaging 20.1 points, 9.3 rebounds, 4 assists, and 1.7 steals per game in his senior season. And he is listed at 6'6", 200 pounds. So like I said, he's just good guard depth this season and could be a guard that eventually works his way into the rotation for you, either off the bench or as a starter. Low risk, high reward move. And now when you look at what else this Texas basketball team needs to add to the roster, I think now you need to exclusively focus on the post, right? You brought in Jason Kent. You're rolling with Caden Shedrick right now as your starting center. I do think you could find better potentially. It depends on what's out there. I'm not just super knowledgeable on what's out there in the portal, right? I do think Caden Shedrick could be a serviceable starting center. I also think you could bring in somebody that could work a little bit better for this basketball team. But nonetheless, Caden Shedrick is going to be a part of the rotation. And so I think you need to bring in one more really talented, versatile big to really set this team off. But right now I'm looking at this roster and saying they can do big, big things in college basketball next season. I'm not going to say they're going to win the national championship or they're going to go to the Final Four, because all of that is hard to do, right? Especially in a, single elimination game tournament, right? But when you look at this roster and you look at the holes they had last season and what this roster, at least so far on paper, should be able to do, definitely giving me 2022 vibes. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, but tomorrow, Pro Football Focus will be on Locked On Longhorns. Once again, should be a dynamite episode. Hook 'em. Peace.